Dr. Bright, can you hear us?
Loud and clear.
Thank you. We're trying to work on the audio.
Okay.
Now?
Good. I can hear.
Okay, actually, can you please speak again?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, you can hear us. All right.
You guys can hear me, right?
We can hear you, but you're sounding a bit low.
Oh, okay. Is it better?
Yeah, no.
My volume here is at the maximum.
What did you say?
I said my volume here is at the maximum.
Okay.
I can switch to another laptop. Just
Let me see. So we're using this, right? It's supposed to be working. It's working, right?
Recording in progress.
Can you speak, please? Dr. Aluze, can you speak, please?
oh, okay. Is this better? Can you hear me? Or let me switch to another device. Perhaps it's my iPad that is the problem.
Hi.
Okay, so can you hear me better now?
Yeah, we're trying to fix it. Hi. Hi. Yeah. It's not him, it's the speaker. Hi, Dr. Aluze, can you speak, please?
Yes. Is it better now?
Yes, it's better. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you so much for joining us. We know there are several panels running concurrently, so we appreciate you taking the time to be here and be be as passionate as we are also on gender and sexuality in Nigeria. So we're going to really get started. So again, this panel is on new light on gender and sexuality in Nigeria and the African diaspora, and it is sponsored by the Lagos Studies Association. So we have 4 presentations lined up for today. And one of that will be, the first one actually is going to be African presence in the 1930s through the 1950s in the United States, a study of West African students and intersectionality of gender, class, and race. And that would be by Gloria Chukwu of the University of Maryland, Baltimore. And then next will be the one of Alex Is Not Gay, Homophobia, Countersexuality Practices and Celebrity Culture in Nigeria. And that's going to be by Rosemary Popola. The third one is going to be Religion and Sharia Crisis, Women and Interfaith Peace Building Initiatives in Northern Nigeria from the 1992 to 2018. That's going to be by Mubarak Sapor from the University, Makerere University. And the last and the last one is going to be Let the Archives Speak, that which was hidden. Cruel intimacy, sexual violence, and the imperial politics of domination in colonial Nigeria by Bright Alose from Portland State University. So I'm going to have each of the presenters just like introduce themselves in like 1 minute. And what I mean by that, I know we all have diverse research and all professional experience, but I just want to say what your work is, your research, or any sort of connection that you have with these new lights of gender and sexuality. So more like your name and then how your work is connected to the passion that you bring to that in a minute, and then we'll come back to start the meeting. So I'd like to start with Gloria Chukwu. And I'm sorry if it is doctor, professor, I'm just going by what I have there. I just have the names, I'm not sure. Thank you. And I have shared the audience. My name is Gloria Chukwu. By training, I teach at the University of Maryland. My research is that, or rather, my today's presentation about my larger research. We started with the expansion of my main research on the Pakistan, Nigeria, to the diaspora, and of course, trying to link people in the diaspora with the ending to those concepts of the West with the United States. So, my economy was in West African women students. I took that in the 1950s. So, I have seen the gender gap in literature and studentship. Thank you so much for that introduction. And then you can know what I've married people out with Florida. Right. What the privilege my name is good me to and my phone is doing so community culture in Nigeria. The last 3 years, I've organized a panel of pain to bundle and fund to make Chinese attention as they of the country. And so particularly for this dedication, we're exploring in how the culture complicated airlines in Nigeria and the ways and forms in which they respond to important reality in important and distributed. And the sense in which not just if you just mention an historical tragedy that always shows personality in Nigeria expand and maybe combat the line in social media communication, and particularly how
so this is respond to what I'm telling, where a lot of the Nigerian public, the government of public, because the extent to which they sort of control or do not conform to the ideas of the business.
Thank you so much, Dr. Controller. And can we have Mubarak Tafar just give us 1 minute introduction of yourself, your institution, what you do, and then your connection to this panel and the institution. So. We have, I will say, okay, we have to skip that. Sorry, I was hoping the person is there. So the last person to introduce themselves will be Bright Alonzeg again, 30 minutes. So just go over a brief introduction and connection to today's panel.
Hi, friends. Thank you for having me in this panel. I really think it's important. And at the core of my research, I am an assistant professor of Black Studies at Portland State University, Portland, Oregon. I am a historian by training, and I see myself as a historian of voices. And that is what my research is centered around, local voices. But it is my research is at the intersection of 5 fields of Nigerian, West African, and Black studies. There is the colonial and socio-political history part. There is the women, gender, sexualities part. And of course, there is the part that deals with voices, whether these voices are written or oral. And of course, protest and resistance movements, as well as methodologies in approaches to studying history or African studies. So this panel really connects with my research in the sense that I am looking at the gendered politics of colonial domination, the gendered politics of colonial rule in British West Africa, starting with Nigeria. And it's also a cutout from a chapter in my forthcoming book, Voices in Ink, Petitions and Petition Writing in the Colonial States in Igbo land, Nigeria. So in that, I had published an earlier version of this in 2019, but I'm going to look at sexual violence, it's the sexualized aspect of imperial domination. And I think it's just one aspect that it's not often emphasized in British colonial history, especially the banality of sexual violence and rape in colonial Nigeria. So I think it offers fresh insights into our conversations about sexuality, gender studies, and colonial politics in West Africa. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'm just someone who really loves context, so I wanted us to meet everyone, have a background of where they're coming from, and then be able to really understand their research better, and then the connection to the larger conversation. So you will be our guest speaker. I'm trying to really be mindful of time, and I think we've spent some time on introduction and getting started. So it's going to be 10 minutes for each person, so we can have ample time for questions. So we'll start with you. And what is Joyce of Philippines, from Africa, and I think about then go to the university in received the largest line with students. They probably have the 69 of research. And I hope this is about that, right? In the 1950s, the plan has been in that they call is the institutional study and of course automated favorable relationships with authority president. And then that comes into account with other students. Really was not and so because of these relationships that operated in the 1920s, in 1939,
It facilitated the admission of 8 students from the university. Because this is very well mainly from the side and of course, many of them of course getting involved in the activities facility. This study is performed by the gender in studies and publications on African solution in the United States. And then it's also informed by the fact that gender also informed our teacher age the access to higher education, even within Africa, and also access to maybe the white across and so because of gender disparity, I've decided I've already published my book chapters in general because some of the male students in the 1930s. And that's when I realized that not much like the public studies carried out female students. And so I began to inquire where there are no students from Western, but we are contemporaries at this now. I was able to find out to feel that including Nigerian and all, maybe last offense and talking in board still when all of Sierra and of course Nigerian and already jokes. The good questions I want to address in this aspect include how do the intersectionality of gender, class, and race affect West African students, especially as we complete and their adaptation to the US society. How will these factors affect the opportunity of employment, housing, and personal experiences? In what ways will these festivals demonstrate their presence as partners in the United States? And what at their presence in the United States and the position of college, degrees, and certification afforded them better freedom, economic opportunities. As I said, I looked at 6 of these students in the 1930s. One of them that has quite a lot of information about her and her activities was husband's Salon, and the reason why there is not information to work with about how she was able to write a memo about activities in the United States, in England, and of course, we work with very from the relationships. Wherever she acquired higher education, and of course, when she got back to she became the first woman elected. This book has and it's the great challenge. The first elected mayor. This were the great independence period. of course, in the first independent period, we also protested a lot of elections. And so the minimum payment a resource for scholars who are interested about female schools and activities in the United States in the time period. Another question that I looked at, but not much information. And the line volume 4 also from she was able to migrate to the United States and also education. She wanted to study in the data mind based on circumstances and the connections to the level to build, and as a result, she turned into art and became the first female artist in the ceremony. Now, another lesson I looked at is our dog, very lasting. I don't know how many of you know how this and the now she was able to write 5 novels between 1970 and 1978. She was regarded as the first African woman to graduate of got a degree in journalism. And so with that degree, she was able to enter into broadcasting and actual journalism, writing columns in newspapers, and studying of newspaper page. But of course, what here are those novels that she wrote, which was literary studies have been reviewed and but of course, unfortunately, I confused something like I learned. She wrote some newspaper columns in the United States, but I'm not able to find this to ascertain what kind of experiences, what kind of subjects she was interested while as a student. And of course, all of them experience issues in the United States. And because of time, and like I said, I have 6 of the female students. So out of these 6, who in the novelist, in the authors, was able to make something but not much about her experience in the United States. And of course, image Ford, which is also Sarah Young, acquired was among the first African women to acquire one countries. That's why he was in the government of the university. And not much to put together or just together an experience in the United States, how she was able to go to Northwestern University and acquire doctorate degree as early as 1966. And of course, I do have some questions and suggestions that I will share with them help me advise us to help me directly with some of the areas that I can in which we are in order to fill in the gaps with these experiences. As I said, this is a work in progress. It is part of the larger work. Our students, but if we concluded the ones twice here, there is no question. There are many of these students, such as colleagues, we have information about them. There are the parts of the men that I talked about at the beginning, who founded cultural musicians and through bands. And of course, this African women and well encouraged pursue the higher education in the US. I think that is my dream. They knew one through their activism as part of the studies and as founders of important cultural and issues in the United States. Some of them were involved in Pan-African organizations that fostered their activism, helped them to find their leadership ideas, techniques, and organizational strategies which they deployed after the revolution when they went to back to their respective book sites. That enabled them to actually go to the rest of the they all taught US out where the experience strict, ambitious, and access. They encountered Native African Americans and whites and had strong views on international relations and international politics, analysis, and of course the relationship between Africans and African Americans and how to strengthen those relationships to help in the this African students influenced by Black intellectuals, and they did cultivate enduring relationships with them. Upon the dawn, their respective immigrants, and this was African, and formidable nationalists, anti-European journalists, social justice activists, famous artists, entrepreneurs, and politicians. They help in the decolonization of the civil service and later governments. They nurtured elite families and maintained a lifestyle of privilege class, invested in the education of children, some of them sending children overseas, giving up as a very young age as sex. Studies and gambling, gambling, so my request is how I can reach, for instance, adult. I understand she is in her 90s now and living somewhere downtown, but I don't have any contact. Because I'm also encouraging us to start thinking of writing something about experiences, if not for any other purpose, because generations to come would like to learn about how we level to the top terrains of the United States. And that would serve as and one of the other historical communities that Africans found transforms. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. That was really great. Just to think back to this period and think about how we heard so much about the male, people, and think about how we don't get so much about the women, and we're still having challenges with figuring out what their experience was, And part of the thing that that I would like for you to keep thinking about, that might come up in the discussion question answered earlier, but will be what we're talking about this is that we can hear still of the other one. Right? Is there a particular reason? And then you talked about class when you were talking about discussion. So part of the question there would be, did your class play any role? Right? Was there like a class difference of that between the male and the female, and did that play into how we learn about the men and the women? You also mentioned race, but I was wondering like how this is a factor as well in the experience here, or even when we go back to the wars that are the racialized communication that we should be having in connections to all of these. So thank you again so much for the presentation. And then we'll go over to the next person. And then we took the time around a little bit since we are missing one presenter. So each presenter is having 15 minutes. So Dr. Popola, you're going to have 15 minutes to talk about your presentation. And your timer is going to stick with each other.
Thank God, all of you. That was my opinion. Maybe some people be able to do that. That's not a person. When you have to do the this presentation, I don't have one day. There are something that in order to be one talent and why I like the wider presentation. I like the widely well-known male actor in Nigeria, known actor in woman things, including anything to do it, like how that is. So here is the outline of my presentation of quality that are with this topic in the question of attention to that during the working with a social argument, discussion of my argument. What is the market that is on Ethiopia and Nigeria in the next 19? Often the theory that working is like a good often is a lot of guns go between to what happens in the world moving called Alex. And after many years of sprinting with the offering decided in the United States, she came out and said that she never had sexual opportunity for many years and that they have been by the standing of Eve. And for the public media, social media audience, that would suggest that the something was wrong with it because hypersexuality or hypermasculinity affected men. And so while all of that was going, they were people coming out, then Alex even about sexual identity or whether it was or was something having people like this fighting with the intention to really want to push the section of the Nigerian public and you haven't touched that. And so the information was then that Alex was even that I've been talking to even in jail that they did having one with the other. And so someone who claims to be the relative of Alex came on a popular came on interview with a popular blogger, and then she happens to follow him on the page. I will try to say it out. I can't in my Nigerian name. I told you, Alex is not the kid. It is not in our family. I'm telling you, it is not in our family. The interviewer is you know, I'm very disappointed in you can't understand it. She responded, what is homophobic about it? I am telling you, Alex is not gay. And following that, Alex, people have asked, Alex is not gay, how do you have a partner for 5 years and no church? And it's just mainly the conversation about sexual identity and not it's also how other conversations were coming up about other male celebrities who were looking to have public relationships, even in their life. And so this is one of the public figures in Nigeria, well known with Stage and other feminine products of idealization of what someone is to be. And so the question is, why should any other stage have so much care and attention to physical presentation and go to the and not just only that, who are Nigerian men in relation to women and beyond just the women, they have people in the masculinity in itself. And so there is a popular podcast that we do in Nigeria for problematic polemics and eating up the quality about almost everything from brain to name it planning. And you go to the next slide and then kindly the show.
Men, fruity. Why do you always go about going
They'll
fruity?
They
Fruity is
get
not.
it.
A lot of men are fruity. A lot of
Yeah,
celebrities are
so
fruity.
if I say women
90% of the men
the
celebrities are fruity. but
About
that's not what
90%.
But
90%.
we will like only women will not reach 5 but let's leave it there.
90 plenty.
But
we
I,
don't judge.
I know you
don't
like
judge.
woman. Me, I like woman. Kule Remi like woman. Wherever Kule Remi dey now, you go dey happy because he knows he like woman too.
Mr. Macaroni.
Mr. Macaroni like woman.
90%.
Um,
Don't just like woman.
Don Jazzy like woman.
Let's not talk about the ones that like women. I want to explore the
Who
fruity
again?
ones.
That's it.
Why are you speaking? Why
Name
are you
a
so
fruity
sure?
one. Just
That's-
Well, all these names you are mentioned, this one like woman, this one like woman.
You can't be
Okay,
sure.
I men,
Men.
fruity. Why do you always go about going?
And so that's a very Nigerian translation with conversation. In Spain, 90% of the Nigerian women are fruity and 50% of the Nigerian non-conforming. And so why shouldn't we be part of the conversation? Why shouldn't we be identity? A hot topic. Why are Nigerians interested in what we do with their information and their private life? They look in their life. And so here in the of the earliest in Nigeria, who is many interesting development related to the backlash of the transgressing PSN and the implication of that for this career. What is the sort of non-conforming sexual in Nigerian society? And how do celebrities navigate with this sexual anxiety in Nigerian communities? The next slide, please. And so, in many events, in many cities of events in Nigeria, the easiest way to try to drive communication and to drive traffic and that obviously questions about celebrities having any kind of public solidarity, whether even the one between men and women. And so here is what Shaka has said many years ago. That's how back when I was also tracking how public communication about sexuality sort of maybe the life of people who are when they in the future. So she said, when Nigerian people female, they are supposedly saying, oh, they are lesbian and stuff like that. Meanwhile, most of your celebrities, so what are people trying to say is the very thing you share this right or even right in the way you look the next. And as well as we know, the earlier cultural production of non-binary child issues like they are working in the shadow, which has seen them in transformed turned into a framework about the career of the character and career. We lost the job because somebody had to output out years. Several of those students going through that and thought and kind of some of the business owners coming up. So why is our sexual identity career how try to like fight about public sexual life and how do they navigate just that reality? I think there's so much talk about that coming up with the country with the future in this very world and in poetry like that of Romeo and stuff like that. But I'm interested in the lived reality, different representation and action. Another instance, just like 2020, two celebrities were having a conversation about who was club changing about the implication of the pandemic. And so here was Ogala coming out to allege that because these two other celebrities, Kerry and Ruby, and the other lady the two have consensus about practically in social media, then it comes to sexual allegations, sexual identity as a form of character information in the way that Nigerians do understanding that anything of lesbian that comes is fighting, goes fire, and all of that. So important individual the second the next. Now I'm working with a lot of content. Here's the concept that I'm talking about how Nigerians respond to the sexual identity of other people. I'm seeing what I'm following queer and trying to put idea of the panopticon. The surveillance that is set on public the extent in which they are conforming or not conforming, the extent in which they idealize community sexuality and the punishment that comes with not conforming. Almost like a society of and punishment that's talking about it. People are publicly shamed, publicly humiliated for identity as a blessing or maybe as a portion to others. The next slide, please. So to live back, I would want to live back into sort of way that we live in Southeast Nigeria, which certainly legal as documented. Homosexuality was not recognized, and it's there, it's lover was there as a barrier. And when the idea of Nigerian nationalism that celebrated in this world now, and for most of it, these people have gone into the background. So why was Southeastern Nigeria receptive to sexuality and recognized, and now in contemporary Nigeria, there's so much about that. There's a lot of explanations among scholars about whether, for me, I always try to change the contestation about whether homosexuality exists in Nigeria. I think that's sort of the scary to me. Not whether it was or it wasn't, that historical fact is that it is here now. And how are we coping? How the people who are going to be coming surviving in those type of context and sometimes even in carrying context? So again, question, why should education of sexuality be a problem, and why, how does the respond, what anxiety, what proportion comes from, whether we identify as one thing or otherwise? The next slide. I'm trying to just show you. So most with a lot of theory in this world, so I'm watching this idea about racialized modeling. In colonial Nigeria, the Nigerians think, the colonialists think that sexual harassment is never that easy. It was love. But what I'm saying now is back on that is when Nigerians think non-binary or queerness is totally anti-Nigeria. It's a Western thing that the Western world is trying to impose into Nigeria. The next slide, please. The other theory I'm watching out is People's idea of sexuality, which is definitely about how we see authority and that which began from the plantations and the classification of crops and stuff like that. But I'm extending the idea of sexuality to the question of sexuality. See, heteronormativity as a form of sexuality, as a form of sexuality in itself, but stand that the way in which we are organized to see a sexual life and a sexual life, heteronormativity as a norm. The next idea I also want to discuss the idea of sexuality, which in many ways align and also I discuss and align with usage of counter sexuality idea. And then the next slide, Here I want to bring the same idea of Africa, which is how to explain the flight that we get, the situation, the freedom and the flight, how the various professionals, the way to sort of resistance, the way to with this heteronormativity or homophobia in Nigeria, or maybe in Africa, the next slide. So the method and process I'm using are definitely from the media, I'm working with text, with videos, with videos, and all of that. The next slide, I have less than 4 minutes, and my primary argument is that the culture complicates queer life in Nigeria, not just sexuality, but queer life in particular, and that they respond with them. I think I can bring what very, very useful. Next, something to think about resistance only in terms of how this is provisional. One of the things I'm learning from our work is the fact that there's a sense in which also it can be conforming, where you're conforming as a way to sort of survive the precarity of the environment in which you live. So for me, I hope femininity and sort of affirming economic idea of femininity is also one of the ways to say I'm not the business where I'm stuck with it. So I can talk a lot about this lady, but time is not in the next slide, please. Also, I have masculinity, but another way to people are responding to me. You can see this is the instance where that is talking about that. In a particular way, that there was many more tiny actions. Another way of saying that no women is this is why I'm here. But for me, the kind of masculinity, I can talk about people in my country who are also familiar with Nigerian popular media space. The next slide, please. Cognitivity is not what I'm saying as a way that people are fighting. And this is not well researched and how, because people also see how deep makeup from dressing and transgressing is also from ideological things. It's even more entertaining. But I think in many ways, also driving the form of activity to when in Nigeria in many ways. But these are guys who dress in female ways and minority, but most people are pushing against it. But the enjoyment they offer, and I'm thinking about the Butler's idea of how performance of finance can be a way to also make society receptive towards non-binary identity next time. And so another way you could see also some of the also from Nigeria and important like the next slide. So there's also interesting, and I'm not sure if my glasses are working correctly, but I can see these big green things that day. Everyone I African where African cinema, which actually examine the picture of queer life from Nigeria, Northern Europe, East Africa, and all of that. From between three divisions, actually been about lived experience of what that focus on. Next slide, the next so the next what you have the next slide, please. So what is celebrity culture communicate queer life in Nigeria? So I think we also need to give the research lived experience of people, whether they performing, performing their request. For instance, the lady that we trans in Nigeria actually was being raised money after Jewish slave had gone already, and in reality to find that it was an off. So what the implication of the genuine point people don't have a class and social status and disability and social capital to combat homophobia in Nigeria. These are many more ideas that were made my interest, and as later presentation conference next year, I have a panel on the faith of panel, but also how performing finance like now also not in need of social mobility as as a way to also create to navigate the economic of attention in the Nigerian Canadian space. So thank you for listening. I'm happy to talk more about my work of questions.
Wow, you were so good with time, just right on time. Thank you so much for that. That was really powerful, so powerful. And I really like the clarity about like what you're actually focusing on for this presentation, thinking about real lived experiences of these people beyond what is seen on social media, beyond the appearance, beyond the depiction of social media, but while also seeing how those are connected. So what are we saying? What's the connection with their own reality? And what is all of that? So some of the things I would, like for you to be thinking about, and we can come back to all of that during question and answer, is to actually think about, part of your last slides around when you showed the male makers who are now cross-dressing as women, and you're thinking about performance and how that might in some way help the visualization and acceptance to unfold of queer life or sexual diversity to critique the so-called like compulsory apparel activity. So I was wondering what your thoughts are about that, especially if we're not seeing so many women dressed as men. So this is more like a one-sided thing. What are some of the things that you see that are driving that? And how are we not seeing the other end of it? So is this connected to some sort of like masculinity, masculinity, or just on gender dynamics as well? So I would like your thoughts, and then we can, for instance, come back to that during question and answer. Now we're going to go to Bright Alonze. I hope that you're ready for us. So Bright is here joining us over Zoom. So the next presentation will be by Bright. So, and you have 15 minutes also. Now put it on time. I'll sort of do this when it's 2 minutes to the end, just to warn you. Take it up.
Thank you so much. Please, the host, can you give me sharing privileges so I can share my slide? Thank you. All right, please can someone confirm that they see my slide?
Yes, we do.
Okay, thank you. So the title of my paper and research is Let the Archives Speak That, which was Healing, Cruel Intimacy, Sexual Violence, and the Pure Politics of Domination in colonial Nigeria. As I said, I'm so glad that I'm in this panel because my research provokes um, fresh insights into how we to interpret imperial politics in British West Africa with lessons from colonial Nigeria. And thank you for also allowing me the opportunity to present virtually over Zoom. I will start first with the evidence, yeah, incriminating evidence, and then share my historiography and problem, then share my arguments, share more incriminating evidence, and share concluding insights. But just to be clear, this research was born as a spin-off from a chapter in my forthcoming book project titled, the chapter is titled Female Voices in Ink, the gendered politics of petitions in colonial Igbo land. Now, when I was at the archive researching on this topic, along with my other larger research on colonial petitions, I found a very disheartening evidence, evidence of colonial sexual assault and rape. So, because the chapter on women in my book was already, huge, about over 35 pages. I decided to make this an entire new project. Now, here's an evidence, October 31st, 1913. Please take note of the timelines. We're going to move between early 20th century, late 19th century, and sometime towards the mid 20th century in this evidence. In a letter from Mr. Akubo Wanewu to to the Provincial Commissioner, Warri Central Province, on October 31st, 1913, he was seeking justice over what I quote, the ungentlemanly and grossly inappropriate conduct of Mr. W.E. Hunt, who was then the acting district commissioner of the Oka district in southeastern Nigeria. Now, Mr. Akubo alleged that Mr. Hunt had forcefully taken advantage of his wife and assaulted her just 3 months after his wife had started working with the district commissioner as a cleaner. He also narrated that Mr. Hunt was in the habit of colluding with a sergeant, and this sergeant committed adultery with a certain unnamed Lagos woman who was going to Uji, via Oka. This was in 1913. According to Mr. Akubo's petition for justice, he said, and I quote, Mr. Hunt, who was reeking of alcohol, asked her, his wife, that is Mr. Kubo's wife, to undress before him. And when she refused, he proceeded to forcefully plunge at her while rubbing her breast and her private parts, inflicting several injuries on her. And it was only an act of divine intervention that my wife was able to run out of the bungalow while screaming and panting. Now, when this matter was brought, before the provincial commissioner, he asked for an investigation and called for Mr. Hunt. On November 9, Mr. Hunt replied, and he admitted that he committed a crime. But then he was very flimsy in acknowledging his guilt and even excused his actions by stating that he was lustful of Mr. Kubo's wife due to the influence of alcohol, as he was, quote, half drunk and just about with senses, unquote. Now, one would expect severe punishments. Well, the provincial commissioner acted, and here was his action. He wrote to Mr. Hunt and told him to, quote, get his bags ready to leave the protectorate because his actions would smear the image. His actions would smear the image of the British in Nigeria and would likely result in a riot by the people. Now, he further advised that Mr. Hunt should be placed on administrative leave of absence, which I got to learn later on from records that this leave of absence was also a paid leave. So he was placed on an administrative leave of absence from Oka, and he was, prepared to set sail out of the Southern Protectorate of Nigeria from Forcados by boat. That was his so-called punishment. Now, the commissioner further advised that the transport officer who was responsible to prepare the paperwork for Mr. Hunt's departure, he advised the transport officer to, quote, keep this matter strictly confidential and out of public view, lest the people think bad of British sovereignty and morality. Can you imagine that? Subsequent official correspondence and reports show that there was no mention of Mr. Kubo again, no mention of his wife, who was a victim, and the case was not even considered again, despite Mr. Akubo repeatedly 3 times writing to the commissioner regarding the case and the gravity of that case, seeking justice. Now, many years later, there's another report, July 8th, 1931. Miss Iyara Aramwiri petitioned the governor of Lagos regarding how one senior officer had, on several occasions, sexually assaulted her and left her bruised. She recanted her experiences, and one was remarkably striking that I uncovered. And in part, her experience reads that the officer made her lift my buba. Buba is a Nigerian attire worn mostly by Yoruba women, and slapped my buttocks very hard, many times, while he smoked his pipe and watched me do my cleaning work in the house. She further narrated that the officer threatened to kill her if she ever opened her mouth and tell a single soul. And according to her, she says, and I quote, I have lived in fear of him every day, and I'm better off dead than alive. Wow. This is one of the many evidence from the archives, testimonies of sexual rape, sexual atrocities committed against female subjects of colonial Nigeria. And the truth is that, I am a colonial historian by training as well. I've done extensive research in British colonial rule. A lot of scholars before me, my contemporaries as well, are doing extensive work on British rule in Africa. We all know the culture of exploitation. We all know the British culture of violence, physical violence. We all know the legacy of dismantling indigenous structures and cultures that were in place in Africa. But what is not often, highlighted in these colonial narratives, particularly with regards to British West Africa, is the everyday transcripts of sexual violence, everyday sexual exploitation that characterized that colonial period. And this means that African voices that speak of these sort of violence and rape are hard to find. Now, in official accounts and narratives, even some academic accounts, you see that when mention is made of sexual violence in British West Africa, oftentimes too, violence is portrayed as a quote native problem, a problem that is unrelated to the effects of empire. So it is this colonization problem that I seek to address. It is this colonization problem that requires us to rethink how we are to understand sexual violence in colonial context. And this is why I think my work is important. And when you compare the slew of works, the vast studies of rape, of sexual violence in colonial East Africa, in Central Africa, I remember Charlotte Merchant's work in East Central Africa, in South Africa. When you compare the slew of literature in these regions during the colonial period, you see that compared to Western region of Africa, there are relatively few studies that examine these cases, particularly locating voices of female subjects that were either raped, sexually molested, assaulted, or taken advantage of. While I was doing this research, I stumbled on Jessica Nota's work that was published last year. She was right to observe that scholarship on sex crimes in colonial West Africa to date has concentrated on official and popular anxieties about rape rather than the real life experiences of girls and women to this trauma. And part of my aim here is to locate these real life experiences. So I do this study in keeping with the traditional spirit of the ongoing literature around sexual violence in West Africa, and of course contributing to you know a, 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 a study that really examines rape as a key feature of imperialism. As a result, this study will allow readers to have a better nuance. It allows for a sustained reading of the violences of trauma through that sexual symbolism of colonialism, which was very obvious in British West Africa. So I see my study as a very expositive one. So, and that's why I said I bring the evidence, just give you guys my arguments and present more evidence. I expose the unspeakable atrocities, these atrocities that mine violence in the archives. That is why my catchphrase is let the archives speak that which was hidden. And I contribute to making colonial rape and sexual violence visible in empire politics and discussions. Here, I draw on specific encounters, involving the atrocious acts of British officers, and we will see from official records, official reports, correspondences, memo, and then of course petitions written by the subjects themselves. Most of whom were victims. I share just two of these petitions as I introduce this study. I discovered at least about 17 petitions. For the want of time, I may not share all of this. But in any case, I historicize colonial frames on sexual violence in colonial Nigeria, and hence the term cruel intimacy in the British Empire. I also frame colonial rule in Nigeria through that lens of sexual violence, so that by identifying rape and sexual assault, I use this as to make the argument that this is a weapon of coercion and domination, and it further complicates rape in colonial Nigeria while invoking a gendered frame and lens of analysis for us. While I was also doing this research, I found Michael Foucault's illegitimate subjugated knowledge a useful framework to kind of understand why most of these records were hidden in the British archives. In fact, I didn't see them in the British archives. I saw them mostly in Nigerian archives. So, and I came to realize that there is the British state managed colonial historiography and narrative fits into this whole idea of illegitimate knowledge, where power to determine who owns access to what kind of knowledge is rests now on in the hands of the superior power. In this case, the British Empire, could decide whether or not to make information like this public knowledge. And of course, they knew that making it public knowledge would be detrimental to the image of the British Empire. So I offer some kind of counter narrative and evidence to show that indeed all these records show that sexual violence was much more pervasive in the Nigerian colony than has been acknowledged in British colonial historiography. And here are my arguments. Yes, it is true that sexual intimacy or relationships, whether they were forced or voluntary, they solder the bonds of empire. I argue that brutality and cruel intimacy were actually innate to colonial rule itself. So here in my argument, sexual violence was a manifestation of the will to dominate. So no matter how we look at it, stories of this sexual violence depict what has been silenced by official colonial historiography. And as a result, the bodies of female subjects offer us a lens through which we'll see the performative act of dominance, the performative act of colonial brutality. And then the second argument I advance is that, on one hand, these atrocious acts existed. On the other hand, it is more disturbing to learn that they were covered up by British officials. So their cover up demonstrates that subjects did not matter at all to them. Any ideas of the European imperial ideology of mission civilis, that is, the mission to civilize, did not matter. Any traces of morality or justice did not matter. The defense of the empire was paramount. So, and when we look at it from these arguments, we can now, rethink these past colonial abuses, particularly sexual violence. And when you read them, together, all of these accounts, you see that it was so banal. It was crazy. The kind of sexual violence that female subjects were subjected to. Now, share some more damning evidence. Another one is Langston Hughes' writings and diaries. In his memoir, he denounced colonial sexual assault that was taking place in Niger Delta region of Nigeria towards the first half of the 20th century. He narrates how he powerlessly witnessed a brutal scene we have some European sailors surrounded two Nigerian girls who were brought aboard the ship and gang raped them. And what was even more disturbing is that these men, these British sailors, committed this crime, and it was against young girls. So that was a crime of pedophilia. They raped teenage girls who were described in used words as usually very young, small, with bushy hair and often haired nails. He narrates that the boss grabbed one of the girls and took her up to his cabin. Someone threw the other girl down on the floor on a blanket in the middle of the sailor's quarters and stripped her of her flowered cloth. Another one, April 18, 1898. In a dispatch to Foreign Office, the acting consul general wrote about the excesses of Mr. Crawford, who was a workshop engineer. And he notes that Mr. Crawford and some crown agents were always put in the habit of holding young women of the protectorate hostage and having carnal knowledge of them against their wishes. Regarding the attitude of the crown agents towards these subjects, the consul general continues to write, they were also in the habit of spanking native women in the buttocks, sometimes with their palms, and please note, at other times with a plank. The former action being for routine manly pleasure, while the latter action being to punish the native women, and they loved gazing at their tanned breasts and darkened buttocks. For Crawford, the consul general recommended that, his excesses have gotten out of hand and it has become an embarrassing law for the empire, so he should be dismissed. Then on July 25, 1898, several cases of reports of sexual assault were filed against Dr. Murphy, who was a divisional medical officer. Please take note, I'm not going to read all of these, but take note of the recommendation of the ACG that Dr. Murphy be sent back to England with immediate effect. Take note of the parts that I highlighted in bold. Dr. Murphy has on many occasions forced the wives of male subjects, to lay with him. And now they have refused to have anything more to do with Dr. Murphy. In the light of these ugly developments, the AG recommended that it will be in the best interest of the empire to send Dr. Murphy home without any hesitation because the natives, that is the Nigerian, natives, are angry. I recommend that he set sail in a few weeks. That is damning. Now, one of the most damning was the consul, George Annesley's brutality and sexual violence that was witnessed almost at an everyday alarming scale. For context, Annesley was a British consul, from 1889 to 1891. He governed the Niger Coast Protectorate, including the Great Benin Kingdom. Now, one incident was very, very remarkable here. It involved the consul Annesley and a woman named Ekan. Ekan was accused of, taking a soldier's car. Whatever happened, Annesley ordered that Ekan should be brought to his quarters. An eyewitness, George Turner, who was a Sierra Leonean and employed as consular clerk to Annesley, narrates that when Ekan was brought before Annesley, one of the sergeants announced, and I quote, the consul, that is Annesley, says, whoever feels inclined to cohabit with a woman, that is Ekan, must come upstairs. And Turner recalled several soldiers rushing upstairs where Ekan was gang raped by Annesley and his soldiers. And in his 1891 letter to the Prime Minister, Turner reported that after the assault, Ekan, the poor girl, dragged herself down the stairs, crying bitterly, while the soldiers came down and made the rape a matter of small talk and laughter. How they actually cohabited with Ekan. The consul himself literally was holding Ekan down while they gang raped her. Really, what do you think that the British response would be? Perhaps they would, punish Annesley and even, give him very, very serious punishment. But unfortunately, no. The Prime Minister at that time, Lord Salisbury, he read the report and even made a notation marked S, noting that he had read the report. Then he added a small commentary at the bottom of the note and said, very bad indeed. That was it. That was the official response. Very bad indeed. Despite the proof, the incontrovertible proof that the Prime Minister did something heinous, he was not punished. In fact, Lord Salisbury was of the position that, the British government must cover up these particular crimes because one, Annesley was a high-ranking officer, and instead of punishing him, it was in the best interest of the empire to conceal these sexual crimes by his own subordinates. Because, according to Los Salisbury, if a crime of this magnitude gets out, it is going to cause a public scandal.
Can 10 minutes round it up?
When I read all of this, the evidence was so damning, and I was glad that I got into the archives to dig out this evidence and helping to lift the veil of that staged British state-managed colonial historiography that speaks to sexual violence in the archives. So here are my concluding insights. Of course, there was no judicial discipline imposed on any of the assaulters. I found up to 17 petitions. I checked up to at least 7 other different isolated non-petition related evidence of sexual assault in colonial Nigeria. Most times the victims rarely got justice. British officials, high and low, they saw the colonies as a place with so much sexual freedom and indulgence. It was, in the words of a certain British officer, a no man's land in terms of moral conduct. So what we see occurring during this period was some kind of libidinous pattern, in the British colonies, because for Victorian Britons, sexual conventions, sexual morality was often relaxed as once they were abroad. And in all instances, most times the official position was to save the face of the empire rather than seriously punish these assaulters. You remember the instance of the embarrassing law for the empire. So protecting the empire interest superseded any concerns for the victims. And lastly, when we look at the conceptualization of rape, it becomes clear that rape and sexual violence was used as a tactic of imperial domination. No matter how British official accounts try to cover this up, imperial expansion has to be understood as acts of war, as acts of domination, as acts of conquest, which was used to punish or destroy. Now, if we are to understand it like that, colonialism is a feature of imperial domination, a way to maintain domination. As a result, we can argue that sexual violence must be seen as one of those extremely effective tools to also establish and maintain domination. And indeed, the subject of domination, the subject of colonial terror was highly gendered. So to reemphasize again, this narrative of colonization really, this aspect really engenders an examination of, the utilization of sexual violence as a framework to assert dominance and achieving conquest, particularly in British colonial West Africa. Thank you, friends, for listening.
Thank you so much for that. Oh, fantastic presentation. Just really taking us back to understand the gendered aspects of colonial interruptions in Nigeria. Like, that was a good case study, which also connects to the broader conversation about how women's bodies and rape, sexual violence becomes like a tool against women. Women's body becomes more like a battlefield during conflict, war, any kind of threat, and then it's also connected to what was going on during this colonial era. And I think it's also like shed light to all of the conversation around the pre-colonial ideology of gender on the African continent, Nigeria, for instance, and what shifted during the colonial interruption, and what can we understand by that? Is there even some sort of connection between the sort of gender violence, oppression, sexual violence, and ongoing, and I'm putting it for post-colonial Nigeria? Is that a way that we can link that to all of these complexities of sexual violence by the colonial interrupters themselves? And how is that playing a role in what we're facing today if we connect it back to the pre-colonial ideologies of gender and sexuality and all of these kinds of interactions? So, amazing presentations there. We'll come back to you for questions if you're able to have some time to think about how is that connected to what we're facing today. Because in your abstract, I saw that you're also trying to bring that. So if you can take a moment during the question and answer to share that. So I'm going to give it back to the audience, so that they can have some time to respond to some questions. So Questions from the audience? Yes, please go for it. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for the presentation. My name is Philip, and I'm a host at UCLA. I'm really interested in this session, which we're actually done the our interests are quite overlapping because I'm actually studying the global legislative secondary school for girls in Sierra Leone. So I'm from Sierra Leone, so it's really our eyes really open. But it was interesting to hear you talk about how these Africans are coming to America for education. And I was wondering if you could situate their educational migration within a larger kind of global context of what was happening. So there's racism, Black Americans at that time don't have access to education in their own country. There's gender inequality. But how can we understand why these Africans were then granted opportunities to come and study when Black Americans, Black women here were not granted? How do we make sense of this migration happening in the context of the larger global problem?
Good question. Okay, thank you. Well, I'm going to address the questions and issues you raised that center on class. This West African women were able to manage to pursue education person. They're talking about they come from a rich family, their parents were educated. Their parents are Indians, send them overseas. Their parents are currently have connections either to missionaries, philanthropic organizations, and even US agencies that have export American education system. So various aspects. And again, we have to understand that although I'm not sure whether the United States government education system, they are aware of the politics of higher education and reference to British educational system. Where products of the educational system were only recognized, often marginalized in terms of employment. Then, of course, I thought the fact that talking of protectorates and colonies, colonized populations, they are where Indians and families living those colonized entities that we are able to afford. Thank you. Thank you so much. Can I have a question?
Thank you, everyone. So my name is I'm a graduate student at FIU. I'm a husband of Super Rosemary and more than a teacher. So while continuing, you mentioned genuine friends in terms of the trisexual surgery that turned out to be involved. And the question of genuine friends, it just brings to mind the question of authenticity of what exactly is an authentic queer representation, especially in the context of the Nigerian celebrity culture, especially when there are legal and social restrictions of the LGBT community. So, I mean, to what extent can this culture be called genuine representation? And then I was thinking that now that if there's a lack of self-identification without then does that not mean that these representations are merely symbolic or maybe even publicity? So in that sense, would it not be better to say that it's assumed representations rather than genuine? I think for me, the people that identify as strength is not in the way that sort of transparent established idea of what we kind of maybe to spend the slave or modern life. The idealized vision of the community, the remove the line that or the line that they should have to do that. So my response to that is relatively different than the human thing. Why is it happening? There might change. I don't know. The food might change. Until quickly and smoothly. The public or transfer of the literature of the individual and just performing the and I just also look at that way that of course the way to engage people can perform identity that they not what they self identify with people. So when you look at like when the okay about years ago where where a front of talking about it's now in otherwise well this person is in person so it's already a mature idea of what it is to be not otherwise. So there's a bit engaged because in the question therapy implications come into the early and what we are doing to heal. But it's not particularly that I was thinking about I think that the question is very valuable. Very interesting.
Thank you. That's a great question. And I think part of that question we will also get into was thinking about the law of the Infected Act that is in place. And is that also playing into who is, performing or who is ostensibly quiet and just trying to use the social media, right? So all of this is like things that we need to tease out. And there's also like questions around, what celebrities are able to do, right? And then other people don't have that class that fail are not able to do, otherwise they're arrested and the law is sort of like in the choose of pig, when to punish. So these are the questions that we can continue to grapple with, but a lack of time, but amazing question. Thank you. And I saw your end, and after you, I'll come to the two people at the back. Thank you. See you. Please go ahead.
My name is Salon. It's so I always select the size. So I was wondering, although I mentioned that you are still in the process of your film and develop doing this work, we focus on the. But I was wondering, when you focus on female African students, you can see you were able to find out in every way how the activities of the lived experience influenced the relationships or spoke the relationship between the West and Africa. I'm saying this in the context of African students that became part of those who advanced the thought of independence in Africa. So I was wondering if they played any role in either aiding independence who have been advancing Western models and mechanisms in Africa. I think we need to try and
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. The only person who does information that absolutely to share about is husband's experience. Well, she had an apple that I graduated to and became a very famous. The family grew up with close to them, anything like that in terms. He was very popular in and helped to influence the African dance rhythms and so communists wrote on the majority of her brother was also involved with African West African dance students. What has been called
Wow. This is a very popular West African students who established two important associations. Cultural, in the case of one of them that were established, really get the correct the other organization. We're turning it into a dance concert, cultural association. And he was able to use the popularity of communities that one. One of the things that attracted communities when Austin's communities went to vetted in 1936, 37, Austin, she became, but those, the fact that those associations were cultivating people, sympathetic people, American white, American intellectuals and celebrities, including the wife of president, who attended national conference. And so through such penetration of this powerful sectors, they were able to make it well. And of course, that anti-colonial campaigns, briefings, talks that they gave in various facilities helped to educate the American audience about Africa, the African culture, and the conditions of colonialism in Africa, and the need to human rights. So communists were the only person that only people West African because there is information. Thank you so much. Thank you. And let's not be questions. Yes. Okay. Yes, can you hear? Can you hear? That's the question. Your presentation is extremely persuasive. A lot of the voices are met, and I was just curious about women, you know, have written about it or looked it because of and other places writing about it, either fiction or fiction. What else are you people talk about?
Please, can you, I think I struggled a little bit to understand the question.
Yes. Can you hear the question?
No, I didn't hear it clearly.
My question is, I can, yeah. So can you hear my voice? I can just try to recap the question. So the question is, find women who are also writing about the sexual violence going on during colonialism. Because most of the things she felt were male voices reporting this sexual violence. So did you find women who protested or who wrote about it also?
Should I answer you straight away?
Yes, please.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I appreciate that question. Yes, the answer is yes. In fact, there were a lot of women of the 17 petitions that I discovered. 14 of them were written by women, and these were women who survived this sexual assault and violence. In fact, I shared one in the opening of this of my presentation, who narrated as an officer lifted her cloth, her dress, and kept spanking her. I also read about one, the officer not only sexually assaulted her, but also used his smoke pipe to forcefully penetrate this young woman. So there were at least over a dozen by women. And then sometimes too, these petitions went beyond, writing to the officers and superior, higher officials. Sometimes there were also mini protests. In fact, some of these women invoked the act of protesting physically against the assaults that they were experiencing during that period. So it's part of my larger narrative to now look at how the protests got gravitated from mere petitions, mere in protest to verbal protest, to going to for instance in the Abba divisional headquarters, going a group of about 30 women when they are just simply to protest that the colonial officers were not listening to their petitions at all, and that they would invoke a reenactment of 1929 in Abar again if they did not act, and address these injustices. So yes, women were actually right then, but it is also important to understand that sometimes, people's experiences of assault sometimes also hard to come out. Sometimes these reports these petitions were written maybe months after the incident had happened, and then oftentimes some women were more comfortable with their partners writing petitions in their behalf. But indeed, women who were victimized during this period wrote most of the petitions.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Alonso. And we have the final question. Does not take minutes to get there. Give the question so you can have time to respond. Thank you. Please go ahead.
I know that I'm not very big, and my first question is, and then the deputy after that. And I'm just curious, if there's a simple data policy in our environment. So it has been and it can be operation. Shelter reviews, expectation, using each added period, in our time. State, I mean, it's in the it's not about period. I sorry, I also wonder it's greater itself. If you have a network of students, I think I'm able to, I'm just network of and then my second question is I wonder if it's speaking of the consumer and short private life, private account life, in the Nigeria and the Southern States. Questions like what are things from this project about the business.
Thank you so much for the question. Who have first?
Thank you, very much, of course, let me take the information up. As the editor, my report, people I read here, they and so for Nigeria, West Africa, people, potential student who were interested in for where they have relatives or friends, or where the recommendations have been made. Since demonstrated and happened when he brought it Southeastern Nigerian students to be done because they had connection. And so New York also seems to serve as a hub, because that's where we have massive terrorist concentration. Syria, students. Of course, in few of them we are also. So yes, transnational connections, and then they had a question much simpler than it would have been And then we also have to understand the context, the environment, the medical doctor, visual measure of risk that African Americans have to be included. And then all these consequences few of them that are something about talk about how they dealt with discrimination, not only from non but also from African Americans. Even though African American intellectuals and families also have to rent in terms of transnational mental discussions, again, the politics is a selection process. So the decision, what were the criteria for selection? And I explain why what points in particular established and scholarships brought to me Nigerian students, including one of the former ministers, education ministers, education minister of Nigeria, Diaspora, and in future, scholarships. Thank you so much. So that's for the gap between the private and the public. The boundary between the private and the public so much the last year, and how that bring the camera into their bedrooms, even on the other kinds of applications. So you go what you say that you're experiencing the sunlight, the glass of life, but that is not anymore the situation gets. Here and even by solutionality, one can do the data regulation. And you do the combination of podcasting and doing something positive in the same thing. The people don't need it. Censorship doesn't need it anymore. And the problem that we not just the virality of it, but also the economy that comes with an environment. You can say, oh, I came on somebody having 3 stones long way and stuff like that. Private university, it's not going to be for me. And that's what I'm excited to with, bringing into concern, questions around privacy, questions around even how technology, just so-called breakdown between the private and the public. It's something you have to jump into. Not something else somebody wants to record, getting somebody I think anything, interview of the church or any way to record. You also make that even more problematic. The private conversation between you and I there, after handle work problem, for information valuable for the purpose of shocking people to react out of reality. There's just also a foreign and that is the foreign, and that is also the fact of gender. What do you need to be all the kind of the whole where the public, you want to show and you your husband so that you can get money, they or something like that. Imagine the way of also driving. One of the major problems in America was get offer a kind of discussion with people. Private conversation that comes from them. When they're going to get attention of the police, believing that attention will come with knowledge. I think about.
Thank you so much, Liz. Just right on time. Thank you, everyone. And your chair has been Ajayi Lawal Esther, Comparative University Studies Assistant Professor at Salon College. Thank you so much.
Yes.
I